As long foretold, upon that morn, there was a blessed Messiah born. O tagagi esiraki, unlad kanasta sakronali, his quivnagi ergonri, a hogdar Sarah, an ogdani, a wira war ibaris day, a clan bogdeva, gwinish goshabe, his terrace and crow, na dune go joe, go nairi pasta, na green a hogue. Near Bethlehem did shepherds keep their flocks of lambs and feeding sheep, to whom God's angels did appear, which put the shepherds in great fear. Prepare and go, the angel said, to Bethlehem. Be not afraid, for there you'll find this happy morn, a princely babe, sweet Jesus born. With thankful heart and joyful mind, the shepherds went his babe to find. And as God's angels had foretold, they did our Savior Christ behold. Within a manger he was laid, and by his side the Virgin Maid. As long foretold, upon that morn, there was a blessed Messiah born. As long foretold, upon that morn, there was a blessed Messiah born.
Merry Christmas to you. I hope that you're enjoying the Christmas season as much as we are, and wishing everybody just a wonderful Christmas as we remember the Lord, Lord Jesus, and just enjoy family and all of the good things that we can. I know there's a lot of worries for many of us, but I'm just hoping that we'll be able to set those aside for a little bit and just remember some of the good things and enjoy our family and some time off. You may have seen in the news that today, December 21st, there is a very uncommon event happening in the skies. There is a conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter, and it's actually very, very close. It's so close that you can, with the naked eye, it looks like one bright light in the sky. And apparently this is not very common for them to be that close. Conjunctions do happen maybe every 20 years, but there hasn't been one this close since 1623. And that one was not visible in Ireland because we're too far north. And so one that was visible in Ireland, you have to actually go back to 1226, the last time Saturn and Jupiter were so close. And so that's 800 years ago. Well, we were hoping to go out and see it tonight. We were going to climb a hill near our house here in Wexford. But of course, the Irish weather, which can always be depended on, was cloudy and rainy, and there was absolutely no chance of seeing it. But if you are interested in watching it, I know that tomorrow night and perhaps the following night, but definitely the 22nd, it will be a little lower in the sky, but will be visible. And apparently this will be your last chance to see such a close conjunction of these two stars in the sky until 2874. So it's going to be another 800-year wait. Now, it's very interesting to me, that fact, because what you may not realize is that there was a conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter and also the planet Mars in 4 BC. And the great astronomer Kepler calculated that, I believe it was in the 1600s. And he actually believed that Jesus was born when that conjunction of the 3 planets happened. And he thought that that was perhaps the star that the wise men saw. And also the Chinese observed 2 years later a star that perhaps fits the timing of when Jesus was born. But it brings me to the subject of the wise men in the Bible. We read about them in Matthew chapter 2, and they're just a fascinating phenomenon, fascinating group of men that we see. We assume there were 3 because there were 3 gifts that they gave to Jesus. But who were these men? Well, it may help us to understand the wise men, to recognize that before the birth of Jesus Christ, there was a longing for and an expectation of a remarkable world leader that was going to be born in Israel. And it's interesting to me that this was not just in Israel where people were waiting for the Messiah or the anointed one of God, because the Old Testament had told in so many different places how the Messiah would come. But it wasn't just in Israel, but it was throughout much of the known world, particularly the East, that people were expecting a world ruler to arise in Israel. We're told by Tacitus and Suetonius and Josephus, who was an ancient historian, that there prevailed throughout the entire East an intense conviction derived from ancient prophecies that before long a powerful monarch would arise in Judea and gain dominion over the world. There is still ample proof both in Jewish and in pagan writings that a guilty and weary world was dimly expecting the advent of its deliverer. And so it's in that atmosphere of expectation of a deliverer, of a king that will rule over all the world, that the wise men begin to see the star and they make their journey to Jerusalem. Now, who were the wise men? Well, the wise men would have been priests. They were definitely astrologers. They were men who studied the skies, who observed and recorded stars and their movements and planets. And so they were very used to that. They may have been scientists as well. These were highly educated men. And they were also men who had a regard for faith. Now, the Jews had dispersed all over the world, and there were many Jews dispersed around the East. And it seems that through these Jews, the wise men would have heard a prophecy in the Old Testament that led them to conclude that the star they saw signaled the birth of Jesus. And I'm going to read for you. It's just a short verse, but this is the verse that they seem to have known. It says in Numbers 24:17, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and batter the brow of Moab, and destroy all the sons of tumult. And really, it's remarkable to me that such a small scrap of information led them to the great lengths that they went to, because they knew this verse, apparently this prophecy about Jesus, about the Messiah, that his star would come out of Jacob and a scepter would rise out of Israel. And when they saw the star, they immediately recognized this is the star that we see Numbers chapter 24 and verse 17 speaking about. And to be honest, as I think about it, I mentioned at the beginning, Kepler thought that the star that they saw was the conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars in 4 BC, and it's certainly possible. But some details in Matthew chapter 2 would lead me to believe that the star was more likely something miraculous, and it was a star that was totally different to anything they had seen. Of course, conjunctions of planets are common, and I know sometimes they were viewed in ancient times as like a harbinger or a precursor of some momentous event. But I think it was something very specific that the wise men saw. But again, we don't know for sure what it was that they saw. So they see this star, and somehow they recognize this is the star that signals the birth of the king that's going to be born in Israel, and he's going to rule over the whole world. And they recognize this. And of course, Jesus did not rule over the whole world in his first advent when he came, but the Bible tells us that there will come a time in the end of time when Jesus does rule over the world. But that's another day's work, so we won't get focused on that in this broadcast. But they see the star, and then apparently the star disappears. And they make the decision to travel to Israel because, again, they recognize that the star comes out of Jacob, the scepter comes out of Israel. And so they journey to Israel to find this king. And it's interesting, they are taking a step of faith, okay? They're believing that the Messiah, this deliverer, whom they don't know very much about, is going to be there. It also says in Matthew chapter 2 that they tell Herod when they arrive that they have come to worship. How amazing is that? They recognize that this one who is to be born is a king. Though a babe, he is a king, and they are coming to worship him. And so they take their journey. They arrive at Jerusalem. And, in their simplicity of mind, they go to the official king of Israel. And that is Herod the Great, okay? Herod the Great is the king in Jerusalem over Israel at this time. And you need to know a little bit about Herod for the story to make sense, because they come to Jerusalem and they ask this question, where is he who is born King of the Jews? Now, Herod the Great was, to put it bluntly, a murderous sociopath, okay? If he lived today, he would probably be diagnosed with a lot of serious mental conditions. Herod was insane. And one of the things he was known for was that he was insanely jealous. He actually murdered his two favorite sons, Alexander and Aristobulus, because he feared that they would take the throne of Israel and that they would reign instead of him. And so he was crazy. Augustus said of Herod, I would rather be Herod's pig than his son, because if I was his pig, I would have more of a chance of living. And he was an insanely jealous man. And so when he observes these priests, these astrologers, they were also men of means, they were wealthy. They give Jesus later on in the story some incredible gifts. And when he sees them, Matthew chapter 2 says, he is troubled and all Jerusalem with him. And the thing is, when Herod got troubled, when Herod was anxious, everybody got troubled, because he was a very dangerous person and people were terrified of him. And so he's worried. And why is that? Because in this king of the Jews, as the wise men say, Herod sees competition for the throne of Israel. And so he plays along with the wise men, but he wants to kill this Messiah. He does not want anyone who might take his throne. And so Herod asks them, he says, when did the star appear? And we later find out in the story that the star had appeared 2 years before the wise men arrived at Jerusalem. So this had been a long journey for them. I don't know how soon they set out from the east after they saw the star, but it was 2 years before they arrived at Jerusalem. Now, the reason Herod wanted to know that was because he wanted to kill this king of the Jews. And it's a tragic fact of history that after the wise men visited Herod, sometime later, realizing that the wise men had not come back and reported to him as he asked them to, he kills all the children in Bethlehem 2 years old and younger. This is the kind of perverse, cold, calculating man Herod the Great was. And that's what he had done. But that detail helps us to know that it was 2 years before the wise men arrived at Jerusalem that they first saw the star. So Herod says to them, when did you see the star? And they say, well, it was 2 years ago. And they ask him this question. They'd asked him the question, where is he to be born? Now, Herod doesn't know the answer to that. So he convenes some sort of a conference of the chief priests and the scribes. Now, the scribes were very simply experts in the Old Testament law of Moses, okay? And so he brings them together. Now, again, these Jewish religious leaders would have been terrified of Herod. Herod had killed Jews. Early in his reign, he had destroyed the Sanhedrin, which was an important group of Jewish leaders, religious leaders that made certain decisions in Judaism and in the community there, and very powerful. And he had destroyed the Sanhedrin early in his reign. So these Jews would have, these priests and scribes would have been very afraid of Herod. And he asked them, he says, where is the Christ or the Messiah, the anointed one? Where is he going to be born? Now, of course, they knew the Old Testament scriptures very well. And they knew that Micah chapter 5 and verse 2 says that Jesus would be born, or the Messiah, who is identified in the New Testament as Jesus, will be born in Bethlehem. So the chief priests and scribes tell Herod this, and Herod secretly calls the wise men back. Now, we always think of the wise men kind of just making a quick pit stop in Jerusalem and then on to Bethlehem. They may have been there for some days while they waited for an answer about where Jesus will be born. And Herod calls them secretly to him, and he tells them, look, Jesus is going to be born, or the Messiah is going to be born in Bethlehem. And he said, go and search for him, so that when you find him, come and tell me, so that I can come and worship him too. Now, Herod no more intended to go and worship the Messiah. He wanted to kill him, remember, as a competing claimant to the throne of Jerusalem. So he tells them this, and you think of it from Herod's perspective. He knows that if he goes down there with soldiers, well, this young king, his parents are probably going to whisk him away so that Herod will never be able to catch them. But if he sends the wise men, he may be able to stealthily send some soldiers down there who can put an end to him. And it's interesting to me as well that the wise men have to ask Herod where Jesus is going to be born. Now, Micah chapter 5:2 was very well known to the Jewish scholars. They knew that. Even in Jesus' day, they knew that that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. In fact, at one point, it's thrown at Jesus because he grew up in Nazareth, that he can't be the Messiah because he's not from Bethlehem. Now, of course, he was born in Bethlehem. We know that. But it's interesting to me that the wise men didn't know that. In other words, the only shred of information that they appear to have had was Numbers chapter 24 and verse 17. And that is such a small piece of information. But they took that seriously enough to take a long journey that took them 2 years to get to Israel because they believed that it was true. And again, these were not Jews, as far as we can tell. They were not Jews. They were priests from some other religion, and yet they did want to find this king. Now, what happens next is interesting. The wise men are excited, and they leave Jerusalem to go to Bethlehem. And as they leave Jerusalem, the star which they had seen back in the east 2 years ago and disappeared as they, at some point before they departed to go to Israel, the star reappears. And this is another reason why I don't think the star could have been a conjunction of the planets, was because this star was like heavenly GPS, the Bible tells us. It literally led them not only to Bethlehem, but to the very house where Joseph and Mary and Jesus were now living. Now remember, a lot of times we think of the wise men coming to the stable. If you read Matthew chapter 12, it's quite clear that Jesus was 2 years old by now. And Joseph and Mary had settled down in Bethlehem at that time, perhaps rented a house, and Joseph would have been working as a carpenter, and they were living there. And so when these wise men come, Jesus is a little toddler running around the house. Okay, he's about 2 years old. And the wise men, they see the star, it leads them to Bethlehem. And Matthew chapter 2 also tells us that the wise men rejoiced when they saw the star. Why did they rejoice? Why? Because as they followed what God had already showed them, he was giving them further guidance, and he was showing them exactly where to go to find the Messiah, this king that, remember, they had come with the express purpose of worshiping. Well, they come to the house and they find Joseph and Mary. And it says the young child, Jesus, he's no longer an infant again. He's about 2 years old. And it says they bow, they fall down, and they worship this king. Can you imagine these aged, wealthy, intelligent men? These are scientists, these are men of letters. And yet they literally fall down before this little toddler and they worship him, recognizing that this is the king that Numbers chapter 24 and verse 17 speaks of. And the record in Matthew chapter 2 also tells us that they gave him some significant gifts. They gave him gold. Of course, gold, a gift worthy of a king, recognizing that he is a king. They give him gold. They give him frankincense. Frankincense was a resin from certain trees, a very beautiful smelling substance that was used to make sweet incense. And they give him, it's very costly. Frankincense, very expensive. They also give him myrrh, and the myrrh is very significant. The myrrh would be, again, a resin that was from certain shrubs in Israel, in that part of the world. But myrrh was something that was used to prepare a corpse for burial. And looking forward to when Jesus would die on the cross of Calvary for the sins of all humanity, they give him myrrh. And recognize this. You know, it's interesting as the kings, as these wise men come, sometimes they're referred to as kings. We don't really have any way of knowing if they were in fact kings. But as they come, remember, these are people that are not from a Jewish background. The Jews knew the prophecies about the Messiah, and yet the majority of them sadly rejected Jesus as the Messiah. But these wise men who had very little information about the Messiah, yet they used the information they had and they found the Messiah. And, you know, they show us that Jesus is not just a king for those who are religious. He's not just a king for those who have a certain background or maybe grew up with religion or Christianity. Jesus is a king for everyone. You know, Jesus is a hero for the irreligious, and he can bring peace to your chaos. You know, like the wise men, you may feel like you're traveling from far away. You have no spiritual background, but you know, that's okay. That's okay, because Jesus came to be a king not only to the Jews, but to these kings who, through prophecies in the Bible, maybe also through pagan writings, realized that there was a king being born. And you know, if you keep seeking Jesus, if you keep trying to find him, you'll find him to be exactly what you're looking for. And you'll rejoice just like the wise men did when they saw that star leading them to Bethlehem. You know, Jeremiah 29 and verse 13 And 14a says, and you will seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart. I will be found of you, says the Lord. And just like the wise men, if you seek God with all your heart, you may not know much about Jesus, but if you will seek him with all your heart, you will find him. God will make sure of it, okay? And if you want that relationship with God, if you seek God, if you try to find him, he will show you himself. Like the wise men, maybe read the Bible and seek those who understand it and who can explain it to you. The Bible will be your guidebook. It can show us how to have that personal relationship with God, how to know God. And God will lead you farther if you will follow the ways in which he has already led you. And like the wise men, you'll see that star reappearing again and again in your life, leading you to Jesus. And so tonight, I don't know where you are. I don't know where your relationship with Jesus Christ stands. But he is a king for all people. Thank you. And I want to wish you a Merry Christmas again. And may 2021 be a great year for you in the new year.